You're making a mistake, Marilyn. Without me, you're just a ghost in a designer dress. Then let me fade, Blaine. I'm tired of haunting your house. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we are diving into a story that starts with a signature and ends with a shockwave that rattled high society. It's a tale about Marilyn, a woman who everyone thought was the quiet, dutiful wife of a tycoon. They thought she was weak. They thought she was walking away with nothing. But what they didn't know was that while her husband was playing checkers, she was playing 4D chess with the most dangerous billionaire in the hemisphere. This is a story of ambition, betrayal, and the ultimate power move. If you love stories where the underdog bites back, you're in the right place. The air conditioning in the office of Dorian Highmore was set to a temperature that felt less like a luxury and more like a preservation tactic for a morgue. It was a sterile, aggressive cold that bit through the silk of Marilyn's blouse, but she didn't shiver. She sat with a posture that would have made a ballerina weep, spine fused, shoulders down, chin parallel to the mahogany expanse before her. Across the table sat Blaine Thornwall, her husband, or rather, for the next 10 minutes, her husband. Blaine was a man who took up space as if he were colonizing it. He was spread out in his leather chair, checking his watch, scrolling on his phone, and sighing with the theatrical impatience of a man who had empires to build and nuisances to discard. He didn't look at Marilyn. He hadn't really looked at her in 3 years, not since the merger with the Omnicorp Group had solidified his status as the city's golden boy. "Just point to the line, Dorian," Blaine snapped, not looking up from his screen. "I have a tea time at the Dunes in 40 minutes. Leocadia is already calling me about the reception tonight." Dorian Highmore, a lawyer whose smile was as sharp and thin as a paper cut, slid the document across the table. The paper made a dry, rasping sound against the wood. "Right here, Mr. Thornwall. And here for you, Mrs. Thornwall. This stipulates the waiver of spousal support, the NDA regarding the Thornwall proprietary assets, and the transfer of the estate solely to Blaine." Blaine finally looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. It was a handsome face, undeniably, but it had grown soft with indulgence and hard with arrogance. "Are you sure you understood the terms, Marilyn? No alimony. You walk out with what you came in with," which, if I recall, was a suitcase of vintage books and a lot of student debt. Marilyn picked up the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and black. She looked at Blaine, her eyes a shade of grey that usually reflected his own desires back at him. Today, they were matte, flat. "I understand the terms, Blaine," she said. Her voice was a low hum, steady and devoid of the tremors he was expecting. "I don't want your money. I don't want the house. I just want the exit." Blaine laughed, a short, barking sound. Sent Marilyn to the end, playing the martyr. "You think this noble poverty looks good on you? You're going to be eating instant noodles in a studio apartment by Tuesday." "Perhaps," Marilyn said. She uncapped the pen. The room went silent. The only sound was the scratching of the nib against the thick, cream-colored legal paper. Marilyn V. Thornwall. The loop of the Y was the only flourish she allowed herself. It felt final. It felt like an amputation of a limb that had been gangrenous for a decade. She pushed the papers back. "Done," she whispered. Blaine signed his name with a rapid, aggressive scrawl, barely glancing at the paper. He stood up immediately, buttoning his suit jacket. The indifference was the final weapon in his arsenal. He wasn't angry, he was bored. That was supposed to hurt her more than rage. "Dorian, file it today," Blaine commanded. He turned to Marilyn, his hand on the doorknob. "You can keep the car for the week. I'm feeling generous. But vacate the property by noon tomorrow. Ivelisse is bringing in her decorators, and she's allergic to dust. He meant her. Miralyn was the dust. Old, settled, annoying. Goodbye, Blaine, Miralyn said. He didn't answer. He walked out, the heavy oak door slamming shut, vibrating the framed diplomas on the wall. Dorian Highmore looked at Miralyn, his eyes narrowing slightly. He had seen hundreds of divorces. He had seen screaming matches, vase-throwing, weeping, and begging. He had never seen a woman sign away a potential $50 million settlement with the apathy of someone signing for a package delivery. Mrs. Thornwall, Dorian said, his voice dropping an octave. You know, you could have fought. The prenup had holes. I could have driven a truck through Clause 4. Miralyn stood up. She smoothed the front of her skirt. For the first time, a small, terrifying smile ghosted the corners of her lips. I didn't want his money, Dorian, she said softly. I wanted his signature. I needed him to legally sever ties with me today. Before 5 p.m. Dorian frowned. Why the rush? Because, Miralyn said, picking up her purse, at 5:01 p.m., things are going to change, and I needed to make sure Blaine couldn't claim a penny of what happens next. She walked out of the office and into the lobby. The heat outside was oppressive, a dry, baking oven of a day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. No rain to hide tears. Not that she was shedding any. The sun bleached the color out of the pavement. Miralyn reached into her bag and pulled out a burner phone. She dialed a single number. It's done, she said. The ink is dry. A deep, distorted voice on the other end answered. The timeline is tight, Miralyn. Are you ready to burn the bridge? I didn't just burn the bridge, Miralyn said, looking back at the towering glass building where her ex-husband was likely checking his stocks. I blew up the canyon. The narrative in the city was already spinning. Jessamine and Callista, the twin gatekeepers of the high society gossip column, The Gilded Whisper, had already posted the headline, Thornwall trims the fat. Miralyn out. Mystery Beauty in. Miralyn sat in the darkness of a small, rented storage unit on the outskirts of the industrial district. It was a stark contrast to the sprawling mansion she had slept in the night before. The air smelled of concrete dust and ozone. She wasn't crying over the tabloids, she was working. In the center of the unit was a folding table covered in blueprints, schematics, and a laptop running encrypted communication software. Miralyn wasn't the simple art history major Blaine thought he had married. That was the persona she had adopted to survive the suffocating ego of the Thornwall dynasty. In reality, Miralyn was a mathematical prodigy who had been ghost managing the portfolio of a shell company called Chimera Dynamics for 5 years. Blaine thought his recent success in the lithium sector was due to his intuition. He didn't know Miralyn had been feeding him data, subtly guiding his hand, all while building a completely separate infrastructure he knew nothing about. A knock rattled the metal shutter of the unit. 3 distinct taps, a pause, 2 taps. Miralyn hit a key on her laptop, locking the screen. Enter. The shutter rolled up a foot, and Corwin Ashvale ducked under. Corwin was a man who looked like he had slept in a dryer, rumpled suit, chaotic hair, and eyes that darted everywhere at once. He was a disgraced investigative journalist who now sold information to the highest bidder. Miralyn had bought him exclusive rights 3 years ago. You're a free woman, Corwin said, dusting off his knees as he stood up. He tossed a heavy envelope onto the table. And a poor one, officially. Poverty is a mindset, Corwin. Liquidity is a state of being, Miralyn replied, opening the envelope. It contained passports, keycards, and a dossier. Did Blaine take the bait? Hook, line, and sinker, Corwin grinned, pulling a warm soda from his pocket and cracking it open. He thinks the Project Ether leak is coming from a rival firm in Singapore. He's liquidating his safe assets to buy them out. He's over-leveraging Marilyn, just like you said he would. He's arrogant, Marilyn murmured, scanning the documents. He thinks he's invincible because he dropped the dead weight of a wife. He doesn't realize the wife was the only thing keeping the wolves at the door. Speaking of wolves, Corwin leaned in, his voice dropping. He's here, in the city. Marilyn froze. Her heart hammered a sudden, violent rhythm against her ribs. Alden? Alden Ravenshire, Corwin confirmed. His jet touched down at the private airfield an hour ago. The Obsidian. That jet is bigger than my apartment building. He's not here for a vacation, Marilyn. He's here for the collection. Alden Ravenshire. The name alone was enough to drop the stock market by a few points. A recluse billionaire who made money in industries most people didn't know existed. Deep-sea mining, quantum computing, aerospace defense. He was a myth, a ghost story told in boardrooms. And for the last 2 years, he had been Marilyn's pen pal. It had started accidentally, a correction she had sent to an obscure economic forum regarding a flaw in his algorithm. He had replied. They had argued. They had debated. They had built a digital empire together in the dead of night while Blaine snored beside her. Alden knew her mind before he ever knew her face. He knew her ambition before he knew her name. Is he attending the Thornwall Gala? Marilyn asked. He's never attended a gala in his life, Corwin said, but he sent an RSVP +1. Marilyn looked at the invitation Corwin slid across the table. It was heavy cardstock, embossed with gold. The Thornwall Gala, the event where Blaine was planning to introduce Ivelisse, his new conquest, and announce his victory in the lithium market. +1, Marilyn repeated. The invitation is for Alden Ravenshire, Corwin said, pointing to the name. But the text message I got from his head of security says he's looking for his partner. He's waiting for the signal, Marilyn. Marilyn stood up. She walked to the corner of the storage unit, where a garment bag hung covered in plastic. She ripped the plastic away. Inside wasn't the pastel, modest, supportive wife. Dresses Blaine forced her to wear. It was a gown of midnight blue silk, structured, sharp, dangerous. It looked like armor forged from the night sky. Blaine thinks I'm leaving town, Marilyn said, her voice hardening. He thinks I'm going to go cry in a rental car and drive back to my mother's house in the Midwest. And instead? Corwin asked, a smirk growing on his face. Instead, Marilyn said, running a hand over the silk, I'm going to introduce him to the CEO of Chimera Dynamics. She turned to Corwin. Get the car, not the Honda, the one Alden sent. Corwin whistled. The Maybach is parked around back. You ready to start a war, boss? Marilyn picked up the divorce decree, the ink now fully dry. She ripped it in half, then in quarters, dropping the pieces onto the concrete floor. I'm not starting a war, Corwin, she said, stepping toward the light of the open shutter. I'm ending one. The Thornwall estate was a sprawling monstrosity of glass and steel perched on the cliffs overlooking the ocean. It was designed to intimidate, not to welcome. Tonight, it was lit up like a landing strip. Expensive cars snaked up the driveway, Ferraris, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces. The elite of the city were gathering to kiss the ring of Blaine Thornwall. The air was stiflingly hot, a dry Santa Ana wind whipping through the manicured gardens, rattling the palm fronds. It was a restless wind, charging the atmosphere with static electricity. Blaine stood at the top of the grand staircase, a glass of champagne in hand. Next to him stood Ivelisse. She was younger, sharper, and hungrier than Marilyn. She wore red, a deliberate splash of violence against the white marble. "Stop checking your phone, Blaine," Ivelisse murmured, her smile fixed for the photographers. "She's gone. You won." Blaine slipped his phone into his pocket. "I know. I expected a text. A beg for money. Something. She has too much pride," Ivelisse scoffed, "and zero business sense. Forget her. Tonight is about the merger." Blaine nodded, puffing out his chest. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted, his voice amplified by the microphone system. The crowd quieted. "Thank you for coming. Tonight marks a new era for Thornwall Industries. We have shed the dead weight of the past." A ripple of polite laughter went through the crowd. Everyone knew who he meant. "And we are looking toward a future of unlimited growth." Leocadia, Blaine's mother, clapped the loudest from the front row. She had never liked Miralyn. Too quiet, too observant. "I am proud to announce," Blaine continued, raising his glass, "that we are acquiring the controlling stake in the Singapore lithium sector." A low rumble cut him off. It wasn't thunder. The sky was clear, a vast dome of stars. The sound was mechanical, rhythmic, and growing louder. The champagne in Blaine's glass rippled. "What is that?" Ivelisse snapped, looking up. The wind picked up, whipping the tablecloths and ruining updos. The guests pointed toward the horizon. 3 lights appeared in a triangle formation, approaching fast. It was a helicopter, but not just any helicopter. It was a matte black military-grade Sikorsky, sleek and predatory, with no markings other than a silver falcon emblem on the tail. It bypassed the designated helipad near the tennis courts and roared directly toward the main lawn, the downdraft sending napkins and flower petals swirling into a chaotic vortex. "Who the hell is that?" Blaine shouted, shielding his eyes from the dust. "Security, get them out of here." The helicopter hovered low, its landing gear touching the pristine grass with a heavy thud. The engines didn't cut. They whined down to a menacing idle. The sheer power of the machine made the luxury cars in the driveway look like toys. The side door of the helicopter slid open. A ramp extended. First, 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They weren't hotel security. They moved with the lethal precision of special forces. They took positions at the base of the ramp, hands clasped, scanning the crowd. Then, a man stepped out. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Even Blaine froze. It was Alden Ravenshire. He was taller than he looked in the few stolen paparazzi photos that existed. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, ignoring the traditional tie for an open collar that spoke of absolute indifference to rules. He had a face carved from granite, handsome but severe, with eyes that seemed to dissect everyone they landed on. He walked down the ramp, ignoring Blaine entirely. He turned back to the dark interior of the helicopter and extended a hand. "They're watching," Alden said, his voice carrying over the wind. A hand took his. A slender, pale hand, adorned with a single ring. Not a diamond, but a heavy band of black onyx and platinum. Miralyn stepped into the light. The silence that fell over the garden was absolute. It was heavier than the heat. She was unrecognizable. The woman who had left Dorian Highmore's office in a beige cardigan was gone. This woman was a statue of vengeance, draped in midnight blue silk. The dress was backless, daring, cut to show off the sharp lines of her muscles. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, was loose, cascading in waves down her back, whipped by the rotor wash. But it was her face that stopped Blaine's heart. Her makeup was bold, accentuating the grey eyes that now burned with a cold, hard fire. She looked powerful. She looked expensive. She looked like she owned the very air Blaine was struggling to breathe. Alden didn't let go of her hand. He guided her down the ramp and as her heels touched the grass, the crowd parted instinctively, like the Red Sea. "Miralyn," Blaine choked out, stepping down the stairs, forgetting Ivelisse entirely. "What? What are you doing? Who is—" Miralyn stopped 10 feet from him. She didn't look up at him. She looked through him. "Good evening, Blaine," she said. Her voice was amplified by the acoustics of the garden, clear and bell-like. "You invited the CEO of Chimera Dynamics to discuss the acquisition. I believe you wanted to trim the fat?" Blaine stared at her, his brain misfiring. "Chimera. That's the shell company, the rival, the partner," Alden corrected, his voice deep and smooth, like gravel in a silk bag. He stepped up beside Miralyn, his presence towering. He placed a hand on the small of her back, possessive, protective, and intimate. "Miralyn isn't here as your ex-wife, Mr. Thornwall. She's here as my co-founder." The whispers exploded into a roar. Co-founder. Ravenshire. Chimera. Ivelisse scrambled down the stairs, clutching Blaine's arm, her eyes darting between Miralyn's dress and Alden's face. "Blaine, do something! She's crashing!" "I'm not crashing," Miralyn said, a cold smile touching her lips. She reached into a small clutch and pulled out a folded document. "I'm here to accept your offer. You leveraged your company to buy out Chimera's rival assets. But since Chimera is Ravenshire, and I am Chimera," she tossed the document at Blaine's feet. "You just inadvertently sold 51% of Thornwall Industries to me." Blaine looked down at the paper in the grass. Then he looked at Miralyn, the woman he had discarded hours ago, the woman he thought was nothing. Alden leaned in, his voice low enough that only the three of them could hear, but the threat radiated outward. "You signed the divorce, Blaine," Alden said, his eyes glittering with dark amusement. "You set her free, and now she's come to collect the kingdom." Miralyn turned to Alden. "Shall we go inside? The wind is ruining my hair." "After you, Madam Chairman," Alden said, as they walked past a stunned Blaine and a furious Ivelisse, ascending the stairs toward the house she had been kicked out of that morning. Miralyn didn't look back. The jet engines whined, the crowd erupted into chaos, and for the first time in her life, Miralyn didn't feel like the furniture. She felt like the fire. The interior of the Thornwall mansion was a temple to Blaine's vanity, all mirrored surfaces and gold leaf, designed to reflect his own importance back at him. But as Miralyn stepped through the French doors from the terrace, the mirrors seemed to catch only her. The silence from the garden had bled into the ballroom. The string quartet, unsure of protocol when a hostile takeover walks through the door, had trailed off into a discordant squeak. 300 heads turned. The elite of the city, holding their crystal flutes, looked from Blaine's red, sweating face to Miralyn's cool, imperial visage. Alden walked a half-step behind her, a visual cue that was screamingly loud to everyone in the room. He was the most powerful man in the hemisphere, yet he was ceding the floor to her. He was the weapon. She was the hand aiming it. "Security!" Blaine bellowed again, finally finding his voice as he stormed into the room after them. "Get them out! This is private property. This is trespassing." The head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Graves, who had worked for the Thornwall family for 15 years, stepped forward. He looked at Blaine, then he looked at Miralyn. "Actually, Mr. Thornwall," Graves said, his voice rumbling like a subterranean train, "technically, under the bylaws of the holding company you liquidated this afternoon, the majority shareholder has the right to access all physical assets. Mrs. Thornwall, apologies, Ms. Chimera, is the majority shareholder." Graves stepped aside, folding his hands behind his back. Blaine looked like he had been slapped with a wet trout. "Graves, you're fired," You're all fired." "You can't fire him, Blaine," Miralyn said, stopping in the center of the room. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The acoustics of the room carried her calm, devastating contralto to the rafters. "You don't have the quorum." Ivelisse pushed past Blaine, her red dress rustling aggressively. She marched up to Miralyn, her eyes narrowing. "You think this is a game? You think you can just walk in here in a borrowed dress and a borrowed billionaire and scare us? You're a librarian, Miralyn. You organize bookshelves. You don't run empires." Miralyn turned her head slowly, regarding Ivelisse with the mild curiosity one might show a particularly noisy insect. "I didn't organize bookshelves, Ivelisse," Miralyn said softly. "I organized the tax shelters that paid for the dress you're wearing. I organized the offshore accounts that bought the car you drove here in. And I organized the encryption keys for the accounts Blaine uses to hide his gambling debts from the board." A collective gasp, sharp and scandalous, hissed through the room. "Lies!" Blaine screamed, his veins bulging in his neck. "She's lying. She's crazy. That's why I left her." "Am I?" Miralyn asked. She raised a hand, and the massive screen behind the stage, intended to display a slideshow of Blaine's achievements, flickered. Alden had tapped a single command into his watch. The screen changed. It wasn't a slideshow. It was a live feed of the Thornwall Industries Bank ledger. Lines of red code were scrolling rapidly, draining from one column and populating another labeled Chimera Acquisitions. "That's the live feed from the Singapore transfer," Miralyn narrated, her voice devoid of malice, just stating facts. "Blaine, you authorized an auto-liquidation at 4:45 p.m. to buy what you thought was a competitor. You set the price ceiling to unlimited because you were so desperate to win. You bought Chimera's toxic assets for 3 times their value, effectively bankrupting your liquid reserves while simultaneously handing me the controlling stock options." She turned to him, her grey eyes piercing. "I didn't steal your company, Blaine. You bought it from me, and you paid a premium." Leocadia Thornwall, the matriarch who had spent years making Miralyn feel small, criticizing her cooking, her clothes, her background, stood up from her table. She was trembling, not with fear, but with calculation. She looked at her son, who was unraveling, and then at Miralyn, who was ascending. Leocadia walked over to Miralyn. The room held its breath. Was she going to slap her? Leocadia reached out and smoothed a non-existent crease on Miralyn's shoulder. "That color is stunning on you, darling," Leocadia said, her voice dripping with sudden, terrified honey. "I always said you had the best taste in the family." Miralyn looked at the older woman's hand, then met her eyes. There was no warmth in Miralyn's gaze, only a terrifying clarity. "Don't, Leocadia," Miralyn said quietly. "The ship has sailed, and you're not on the manifest." She turned away, leaving the matriarch stunned and pale. "We're done here," Miralyn said to Alden. "Wait!" Blaine lunged forward, grabbing Miralyn's arm. It was a mistake. Before Blaine's fingers could fully close around her bicep, Alden moved. It was a blur of motion, too fast for the tipsy crowd to track. One moment Blaine was grabbing her. The next, he was on his knees, his arm twisted behind his back at a painful angle, Alden standing over him with a face like a thunderstorm. "Do not," Alden whispered, the sound vibrating with lethal intent. "Touch her." "Alden," Miralyn said. Her voice was calm. A command. Alden looked at her. The fury in his eyes receded, replaced by that unwavering loyalty. He released Blaine, who scrambled back, clutching his shoulder, panting, humiliated in front of the people he lived to impress. "Let's go," Miralyn said. "I have a board meeting at 8 a.m. She walked out the way she came, the crowd parting with reverence now, They weren't looking at a divorcee anymore. They were looking at the new queen, and in the world of high finance, the king was dead. Long live the queen. The boardroom of Thornwall Industries was located on the 50th floor, a glass box floating in the sky. At 7:55 a.m., it was usually empty, save for an intern setting out water bottles. Today, it was full. The 12 board members sat in varying states of anxiety. Blaine sat at the head of the table, looking like he hadn't slept. His tie was crooked, his eyes were bloodshot. Beside him sat Dorian Highmore, looking equally pale. "This is illegal," Blaine was saying, slamming his hand on the mahogany. "It's entrapment. It's fraud. We'll sue her into the ground." "Technically," Dorian mumbled, shuffling papers. "It was a legal market transaction, Blaine. You signed the purchase order. You waived due diligence because you wanted to close before the gala." "Because she tricked me," Blaine shouted. The double doors swung open. Marilyn didn't walk in. She arrived. She wore a white power suit, sharp tailored wool that made her look like a blade of light. Alden wasn't with her. This wasn't his fight. This was hers. She walked to the head of the table. "You're in my seat, Blaine," she said. "I am the CEO," Blaine spat, not moving. "You might own the stock, but the board appoints the CEO. And this board is loyal to me." He looked around the table. "Right? Tell her." The board members shifted in their seats. They were old men, mostly, friends of Blaine's father. They liked the status quo. "Marilyn," said Mr. Henderson, the oldest member, "we appreciate your bold financial maneuvering, but leading a conglomerate requires experience. Blaine has been leading us for 3 years. Leading you into a 40% deficit in R&D, Marilyn asked, placing her briefcase on the table. She didn't sit. She loomed. Leading you into 3 environmental lawsuits that he hid from the quarterly reports. Leading you into a merger with Omnicorp that was actually a Ponzi scheme I had to personally deconstruct and rebuild so the SEC didn't raid this building? Henderson blinked. You did that? Who do you think wrote the Omnicorp proposal, Mr. Henderson? Blaine? Marilyn laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Blaine thinks due diligence is a racehorse he bet on last year. She opened her briefcase and slid a single black folder to Henderson. Inside that folder is a list of every bribe Blaine has paid to zoning officials in the last 18 months. It also contains the IP logs showing he's been using company servers to mine cryptocurrency for his personal debt relief. The room went dead silent. Blaine's face drained of color. That's fabricated," Blaine whispered. "It's time-stamped," Marilyn countered. "And it's already been sent to the SEC. Unless—" She let the word hang in the air. "Unless?" Henderson asked, his voice trembling. He opened the folder, saw the first page, and snapped it shut, looking at Blaine with disgust. "Unless the board votes, effective immediately, to remove Blaine Thornwall as CEO for cause, and appoints me as interim chairperson to handle the restructuring. If you do that, we handle the irregularities internally as bad management decisions rather than criminal fraud. I save the stock price. You save your pensions." She leaned forward, placing her hands on the table. "So, gentlemen, do you want to go to jail with Blaine, or do you want to go to the moon with me?" Blaine looked around the table. He saw the shift in their eyes, the loyalty dissolving like sugar in hot tea. "No," Blaine pleaded. "Henderson, please. My father." "Your father would be ashamed," Henderson said gruffly. He raised his hand. "I move to remove Blaine Thornwall as CEO." "Seconded," said another member instantly. "Third. Fourth." Hands went up around the table, every single one. Miralyn looked at Blaine. Motion carried. Please vacate the building, Mr. Thornwall. Security will escort you to ensure you don't take any sensitive materials. Blaine stood up. He looked smaller now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrified, hollow realization that he was entirely alone. You planned this? He whispered to her as he passed. Every second. You were sleeping next to me, planning my funeral. I wasn't planning your funeral, Blaine, Miralyn said, her voice dropping so only he could hear. I was planning my survival. You just happened to be the obstacle in the way. As the doors closed behind him, Miralyn sat down at the head of the table. She looked at the terrified board members. Now, she said, opening her laptop, let's talk about the lithium refineries. We're going to triple efficiency by Q3. The adrenaline wore off around midnight. Miralyn was on the Obsidian, Alden's jet, parked on the private tarmac. The day had been a whirlwind of lawyers, press releases, and damage control. She had officially taken the helm of a multi-billion-dollar empire. She had won. But sitting in the plush leather seat of the jet's lounge, holding a glass of scotch she hadn't sipped, she felt a sudden, crushing exhaustion. Alden came out of the cockpit. He had flown the plane himself for a quick loop over the coast, his way of decompressing. He was still in his white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that looked like they could strangle a bear or play a concerto. He sat opposite her, not saying anything. He just watched her. I destroyed him, Miralyn said into the glass. I took everything. His name, his house, his pride. He gave it away, Mira, Alden said gently. You just caught it before it hit the ground. Does that make me a villain? She looked up at him. In the movies, the person who plots for years and takes over the company is usually the bad guy. Alden leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The difference between a villain and a survivor is what they do with the power once they have it. Blaine used power to feed his ego. You're going to use it to build something real. He reached out and took the glass from her hand, setting it on the table. Then he took her hand. His skin was warm, rough, grounding. Besides, Alden added, a rare, boyish smirk touching his lips. Villains are usually more interesting. Miralyn managed a smile. True. There's something else, Alden said, his tone shifting. The playfulness vanished, replaced by the intensity she had seen in the garden. Now that you're public, now that Chimera is out of the shadows, we have a problem. Miralyn straightened up, the exhaustion replaced by alertness. What kind of problem? Alden stood and walked to a wall panel. He pressed a button, and a holographic map of the Pacific Ocean materialized in the air between them. A red light was blinking off the coast of a small island chain. While you were dissecting Blaine in the boardroom, I was tracking a signal, Alden said. Someone is trying to override the security protocols on the Deep Horizon rig. Miralyn frowned. Deep Horizon was Chimera's most secretive project, an underwater data center and mining facility powered by geothermal vents. It was the backbone of their entire tech infrastructure. Blaine wouldn't know how to hack a toaster, let alone Deep Horizon, Miralyn said. Not Blaine, Alden said darkly. Blaine is a hammer. This is a scalpel. He swiped the map, zooming in on the signal source. The signal is originating from a relay station in the Swiss Alps. But the encryption signature, I've seen it before. Alden looked at Miralyn, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw genuine concern in his eyes. It's Corwin's signature, Alden said. Miralyn felt the blood drain from her face. Corwin? My journalist. The one who helped me leak the info to Blaine? The one who knows where all the bodies are buried, Alden corrected. He's not answering his comms. He's gone dark. Miralyn stood up, her mind racing. Corwin was the only other person who knew the intricacies of her plan. He knew the backdoor codes she had used to infiltrate Thornwall Industries. If he turned... Why would he betray us? Miralyn asked. I paid him enough to retire on an island. Maybe someone offered him a bigger island, Alden said. Or maybe he wasn't working for you alone. The plane's comm system beeped. A text message displayed on the main screen. It was from an unknown number. Checkmate, Queen. You took the king, but you left the castle unguarded. You have 24 hours to transfer the algorithms, or Deep Horizon becomes a deep-sea tomb. Miralyn stared at the message. The victory of the morning felt 1,000,000 miles away. She wasn't fighting a man-child ex-husband anymore. She had stepped into the deep end of the pool, where the sharks had lasers and the water was freezing. He has access to the pressure valves, Miralyn realized, horror dawning on her. If he overloads the rig, the thermal buildup. It will detonate, Alden finished, with 40 crew members inside. Miralyn looked at Alden. The romantic tension, the victory lap. It was all gone. They were back in the trenches. How fast can this jet get us to the coordinates? Miralyn asked, kicking off her heels. Alden was already moving toward the cockpit. Fast enough to break the sound barrier. Buckle up, Miralyn. The war isn't over. Miralyn sat back in the seat, gripping the armrests as the engines roared to life, pushing them deep into the black sky. She thought she had signed a divorce decree. In reality, she had signed a declaration of war. The obsidian cut through the stratosphere at Mach 1.8, a silent needle stitching the night sky. Inside, the atmosphere was pressurized in more ways than one. Miralyn sat surrounded by screens in the jet's command center. The luxury of the lounge was gone, replaced by the stark blue glow of data streams. Alden was in the pilot's seat, pushing the engines to their thermal limit, but his voice over the intercom was steady. 20 minutes to the drop zone, Alden said. Status on the rig? Critical, Miralyn replied, her fingers flying across a haptic keyboard. The core temperature of the Deep Horizon servers is rising. Corwin has disabled the cooling pumps. If it hits 200 degrees, the geothermal vents will destabilize. It won't just destroy the servers, it'll cause a seabed collapse, a tsunami. She stared at the image of Corwin Ashvale on her secondary monitor. It was a file photo she had taken herself, him laughing over a cheap diner coffee, the man she thought was her friend, her confidant. The man who had helped her burn Blaine to the ground was now holding the match to her own legacy. Why? She whispered to herself. Money is a powerful motivator, but not for Corwin. Alden's voice came through, as if reading her mind. He's a nihilist, Miralyn. He doesn't want to be rich. He wants to be right. He always hated the elite. He helped you take down Blaine because he hated Blaine. Now he's taking us down because, well, we're the elite now. The main screen flickered. The static cleared to reveal a live video feed. It was Corwin. He looked exactly the same. Rumpled suit, messy hair. But the background wasn't a storage unit. It was the sleek, sterile control room of the Deep Horizon rig itself. You made good time, Corwin said, leaning back in the command chair, spinning a pen in his fingers. I assume you're in the jet? Nice toy. A bit excessive for a climate activist, isn't it, Alden? Corwin, Miralyn said, her voice freezing the air in the cabin. Turn the pumps back on. I can't do that, boss, Corwin smirked. Not until I get what I came for. The Chimera source code, the prediction algorithm. The algorithm predicts market trends, Miralyn said. It's useless to you without the infrastructure. Oh, I'm not going to use it to buy stocks, Corwin laughed, a jagged sound. I'm going to release it, open source, to everyone. Imagine the chaos, Miralyn. If everyone knows what the market will do, the The market collapses. No more billionaires, no more thorn walls, no more Ravenshires. A true reset. Miralyn went cold. It wasn't greed, it was ideology. He was a fanatic. If you destroy the market, you destroy the pensions of millions of ordinary people, Miralyn argued, trying to buy time. You're not saving the world, Corwin. You're burning it. Fire cleanses, Corwin shrugged. You have 10 minutes. Upload the code to the secure server I just linked, or I let the core melt. The crew has been locked in the mess hall. They'll go down with the ship. The feed cut. He's insane, Miralyn breathed. He's committed, Alden corrected. He engaged the autopilot and walked back into the command center. He looked at the countdown clock. 9 minutes. We can't upload the code, Alden said. If that algorithm goes public, the global economy crashes by morning. It's not an option. And we can't let the rig explode, Miralyn countered. 40 lives, plus the environmental impact. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to think. She wasn't the victim anymore. She wasn't the wife. She was the architect. She knew Corwin. She knew how he thought. He expected her to try and hack him. He expected a brute force attack. He's watching the external firewalls, Miralyn said, her eyes snapping open. He's waiting for us to try and break in. But he's inside. He's physically on the rig. Yes, Alden said. And the rig is underwater. We can't storm it. We don't need to storm it, Miralyn said, a dangerous idea forming. She pulled up the schematics of the rig. Corwin thinks he controls the system because he hacked the command console. But Deep Horizon wasn't just built for data. It was built for mining. She pointed to a subsystem labeled acoustic telemetry. The mining drones, Miralyn said. They use sonar to navigate. They're on an independent analog circuit, separate from the main digital network so they don't get interference. Alden looked at the schematic, realizing her plan instantly. A slow smile spread across his face. You want to use the mining drones to physically sever the connection to the cooling pump's manual override? No, Miralyn said. I want to use the drones to sing. Sing? Acoustic resonance, Miralyn explained, her hands moving fast now, coding a new packet. If we line up the drones around the control room and blast a specific frequency at high decibels, we can shatter the glass of the server racks. The coolant isn't just pumped. There are emergency gravity tanks above the racks. If the glass breaks, the gravity tanks dump the coolant manually, Alden finished, flooding the room, cooling the servers instantly, and incidentally, flooding the control room where Corwin is sitting. He'll have to swim, Miralyn said grimly. But the rig won't blow. Can you access the drones? Not from here, Miralyn said. The signal is too weak. We need to be closer, within 500 feet. Alden looked at the altimeter. They were at 30,000 feet. Hang on, Alden said, turning back to the cockpit. I'm taking us down. Steep. The jet banked violently, gravity pressing Miralyn into her seat. The sky outside turned from black to the deep, churning grey of the ocean surface. They were dropping like a stone. The obsidian leveled out at a terrifying 300 feet above the waves. The ocean was rough, dark swells rising to meet the jet's landing lights. In the distance, the Deep Horizon surface platform was a lonely beacon of yellow light in the darkness. Range! Miralyn shouted over the roar of the engines. Closing! Alden yelled back. 1,000 feet. 800! Miralyn initiated the handshake protocol with the sub-sea drones. It was a narrow window. The connection was tenuous, fighting the interference of the storm and the depth of the water. Connection failed. I can't get a lock, Miralyn cried. Corwin has a jammer running on the main frequency. Switch to the emergency band, Alden commanded, fighting the stick as a wind shear hit the jet. He's monitoring it. He's monitoring the digital bands, Alden shouted. Use the raw audio carrier wave. Marilyn realized he was right. It was old tech, ancient tech, sending data over a sound wave like a dial-up modem. Corwin, obsessed with high-tech encryption, would have overlooked the lowest frequency. She rerouted the command through the audio channel. Connecting. Connected. I have the drones, Marilyn breathed. 6 units, positioning them now. On her screen, 6 green dots converged on the central hub of the underwater rig, 300 feet below the surface. Corwin is contacting us, Alden said. Marilyn opened the channel. Corwin's face appeared. He looked smug. Time's up, Marilyn. I don't see an upload. Say goodbye to your legacy. Actually, Corwin, Marilyn said, her voice eerily calm, I decided to send you a song instead. What? Corwin frowned. Marilyn hit enter. Execute protocol. Siren song. 300 feet down, 6 heavy-duty mining drones surrounded the command module. Their sonar emitters, usually used to scan rock density, swiveled toward the reinforced glass of the server room. They emitted a pulse. It wasn't a sound humans could hear, but the effect was immediate. On the video feed, the coffee mug on Corwin's console shattered. The screens spiderwebbed. Corwin covered his ears, screaming as the pressure wave hit him. Then, the main containment glass of the emergency coolant tanks above him exploded. Thousands of gallons of freezing liquid nitrogen and coolant gel crashed down. The video feed went white, then dead. Target status? Alden asked, his hands white-knuckled on the yoke. Marilyn watched the telemetry. Core temperature dropping. 180, 150, 90 degrees. Stable. She let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 3 years. The cooling system is flooded. The rig is safe. The crew can override the door locks now that the central computer is shorted out. And Corwin? Marilyn looked at the black screen. The control room is sealed. He's in a wetsuit. He knows the drills. He'll make it to the escape hatch. But he's done. The authorities will be waiting for him on the surface platform. Alden pulled the jet up, banking away from the water and back toward the stars. The G-force pushed them back into their seats. But this time, it felt like an embrace. Marilyn swiveled her chair around to look at the cockpit. Alden looked back. His hair was disheveled, sweat on his brow. He looked alive. You realize, Alden yelled over the engines, a grin breaking across his face, that you just flooded $100 million worth of hardware to save the day. I'm the CEO, Marilyn shouted back, a laugh bubbling up in her chest, a real, unburdened laugh. I'll write it off as a business expense. The sun rose over the city, painting the skyscrapers in shades of rose and gold. It was a clean morning. The smog seemed to have lifted. Marilyn stood on the balcony of the Thornwall building, now the Chimera Tower. The sign was being changed today. The massive T was currently being lowered by a crane, dangling helplessly in the air. She held a cup of tea, watching the city wake up. It had been a week since the night on the rig. The fallout had been massive, but controlled. Corwin was in federal custody. The crew of the Deep Horizon was safe and had received massive bonuses. The story of the attempted cyber-terrorist attack had dominated the news, framing Marilyn not as a hostile usurper, but as the steady hand that saved the global market. Blaine was gone. He had fled to a non-extradition country when the SEC investigation deepened, leaving Ivalis behind to deal with the lawsuits. Last Marilyn heard, he was trying to start a lifestyle blog. The glass door behind her slid open. Alden stepped out. He was dressed in a simple black t-shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the suits of the boardroom. He leaned against the railing beside her, looking out at the crane removing the last of Blaine's legacy. It's a nice view, Alden said. It's a lot of responsibility, Marilyn replied. She looked at him. You saved me, you know. Back then. With the emails. You gave me an outlet when I was drowning in that house. You saved yourself, Marilyn, Alden said, turning to face her. I just gave you the Wi-Fi password. You did the rest. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Marilyn stiffened slightly. Alden, if that's a ring, I'm technically still recovering from the last marriage. Alden laughed. It's not a ring, it's a key. He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver key. Old-fashioned. There's a house, Alden said, in the mountains. No internet, no servers, no staff, just trees and a fireplace. I go there when the noise gets too loud. I want you to have a copy for when you need to disappear. Marilyn took the key. It felt heavy and cool in her hand. It wasn't a proposal of ownership. It was an offer of sanctuary, a partnership of equals. I might need this sooner than you think, Marilyn said, closing her hand around it. The board is asking for my 5-year plan. You'll handle them, Alden said. He hesitated, then reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, familiar. So, what is the plan? For us? Marilyn looked at the city, then at the man who had flown through a storm for her. The plan, Marilyn said, leaning into his touch, is to build something that lasts. No more shadows, no more hiding. I like that plan, Alden said. Below them, the city honked and bustled, oblivious to the fact that the two people watching from above had just saved their world. Marilyn took a sip of tea. She thought about the girl who had signed the divorce papers with a trembling hand, terrified of the future. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had walked through fire and come out holding the flame. Ready for the meeting? Alden asked, offering his arm. Marilyn took it. Ready. They walked back inside, leaving the balcony empty. The sun continued to rise, burning off the last of the morning mist, shining brightly on a world that was finally, truly, hers. And that is the story of Marilyn and the divorce that shook the world. She proved that silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. Blaine thought he was discarding a wife, but he was actually unleashing a titan. It's a reminder to never underestimate the person who knows all your secrets, and more importantly, to never underestimate yourself. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, resilience, and high-altitude romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this with a friend who needs a reminder of their own power, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Let me know in the comments, would you have forgiven Corwin, or did he get what he deserved? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.